The steel-toed boot connected with my ribs with the sound of breaking kindling, and I knew I was about to die behind a construction trailer in Bakersfield, California, 63 years old and forgotten by everyone except the three men who were beating me senseless. "Stolen valor, piece of shit," snarled Rick Torrance, the new site foreman who'd made my life hell for the past 2 weeks. "Think you can lie about serving your country and get away with it?" I curled into a ball on the gravel, tasting blood and diesel fuel while his crew took turns kicking me. My security guard uniform was torn, my badge scattered somewhere in the dirt, and the radio that was supposed to call for backup lay smashed beside me in pieces. "Navy, my ass," laughed Tommy Rodriguez, a crane operator who'd been looking for an excuse to hurt someone ever since his DUI conviction. Look at this pathetic old man. Probably never left his hometown, let alone served overseas. The third man, Jake Sullivan, a concrete foreman with arms like tree trunks, grabbed my collar and hauled me to my feet just long enough to slam me against the trailer wall. "You disrespect real veterans with your lies, old man. Time someone taught you a lesson about honor." Through swollen eyes, I saw the construction site stretching around us, a half-built shopping complex that would house chain stores and restaurants, bringing jobs to a town that desperately needed them. I'd been working security here for 8 months, pulling the graveyard shift because the pay was slightly better, and I could avoid most of the younger workers, who seemed to think every man over 60 was either lying about his past or living. "In it, please," I wheezed, blood running down my chin. "I never lied about anything." "Bullshit." Torrance's fist caught me in the stomach, doubling me over. "I checked the databases. No Arthur Miller in the Navy records for the years you claimed. You're a fraud, just like I thought." That's when I understood. The databases he'd checked were the public ones, the sanitized records that didn't include classified operations or deep cover assignments. The real records, the ones that mattered, were buried so deep that even military personnel couldn't access them without specific clearance. But I couldn't explain that to these men who'd already decided I was guilty of stolen valor. I couldn't tell them about the missions that officially never happened, the operations that had been erased from history to protect national security. I couldn't reveal that Arthur Miller had been dead on paper for 40 years, killed in action, in a place that didn't exist during a war that was never declared. Instead, I reached into my torn jacket pocket and pulled out a device that looked like an old CB radio, military surplus from the 1980s, modified with modern encryption and satellite connectivity. "Code 1, I gasped into the radio. "Emergency call. Message. Father under fire." The response came immediately. "Copy, Father. Code 1 received. Cavalry en route." Torrance laughed and kicked the radio out of my hands. "What's that supposed to be, your imaginary Navy buddies coming to save you?" "Something like that," I said, spitting blood onto the gravel. 3 hours later, a convoy of black SUVs rolled through the construction site gates, followed by news vans from every major network in California. The site went from deserted to swarming, with federal agents, military personnel, and reporters faster than I'd ever seen in civilian life. The first person out of the lead vehicle was my daughter, Colonel Jane Miller, dressed in her Army dress uniform with enough ribbons to blind aircraft at 30,000 feet. Behind her came a team of military lawyers, Pentagon officials, and a man in a Navy dress blue uniform whose rank insignia made even the federal agents straighten up. "Where is he?" Jane's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding troops in combat zones. A paramedic who'd been tending to my injuries pointed toward the ambulance where I was sitting, holding an ice pack to my face. Jane walked over with the measured stride of someone who was controlling her rage through sheer force of will. "Dad?" Her voice softened just slightly. "You okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." "Misunderstanding?" She turned to look at Torrance, Rodriguez, and Sullivan, who were now surrounded by federal agents and looking significantly less confident than they had an hour ago. 3 men beating an elderly security guard behind a trailer is a misunderstanding. They thought I was lying about my service record, I said quietly. They couldn't find my name in the public databases. Jane's expression went from concerned to furious in the time it took her to process that information. She walked over to the three men, her combat boots crunching on the gravel with each deliberate step. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze helium. "I'm Colonel Jane Miller, United States Army. This man you assaulted is my father, Master Chief Petty Officer Arthur Miller, United States Navy. Retired." "That's impossible," Torrance stammered. "I checked the records. There's no Arthur Miller." "Listed—" "You checked the wrong records," interrupted the Navy officer in dress blues, stepping forward. "I'm Admiral Robert Chen, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations. Master Chief Miller's records are classified at the highest levels of government because of the nature of his service." Sullivan, the concrete foreman, was starting to look pale. "What kind of service?" "The kind that doesn't exist on paper," Admiral Chen replied. "The kind that involves spending 23 years in places that officially aren't on any map, doing things that officially never happened for missions that are still classified 40 years later." A reporter thrust a microphone toward the BAOP group. "Admiral, can you elaborate on Master Chief Miller's service record?" "What I can tell you is that Master Chief Miller is a recipient of the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 4 Purple Hearts. He served with distinction in operations that I am not authorized to discuss, in locations I cannot name, during conflicts that remain classified." Admiral Chen's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "What I can also tell you is that this man has given more to his country than most people will ever understand." The reporter turned to me. "Master Chief Miller, how do you respond to allegations that you've been lying about your military service?" I looked at the camera, then at my daughter, then at the 3 men who'd beaten me half to death because they couldn't find my name in a database. "I've never lied about anything," I said simply, "but I've also never been allowed to tell the truth." Over the next several hours, the story exploded across national media. Veteran assault began trending on social media, with millions of people sharing their outrage at the treatment of a decorated war hero. The construction company's stock price plummeted as investors fled from the negative publicity. But the real story was more complex than the headlines suggested. As federal investigators dug deeper into the incident, they uncovered a pattern of harassment and discrimination at construction sites across the state. Torrance, it turned out, had been systematically targeting older workers, especially veterans, with accusations of stolen valor and age discrimination. "It's a power play," explained FBI agent Sarah Martinez as she interviewed me in the hospital. "Torrance uses accusations of stolen valor to eliminate workers he sees as threats to his authority. Most victims don't fight back because they're afraid of losing their jobs. But why target veterans specifically? Because veterans have a code of honor that makes them dangerous to corrupt supervisors. They're more likely to report safety violations, stand up to bullying, resist pressure to cut corners. Torrance has been systematically removing them from job sites for 2 years. The investigation revealed that 12 veterans had been fired or forced to quit after Torrance accused them of stolen valor. None of them had lied about their service. He'd simply used incomplete database searches to justify harassment. Rodriguez and Sullivan, it turned out, had their own motivations. Rodriguez was stealing equipment from job sites and selling it, while Sullivan was skimming money from payroll accounts. Both had been worried that an older security guard might notice their activities and report them. "They targeted you because you represented everything they weren't," Agent Martinez explained. "Honor, integrity, accountability. They couldn't corrupt you, so they decided to destroy you." The legal consequences came swift and severe. Torrance was charged with assault, discrimination, and conspiracy. Rodriguez and Sullivan faced additional charges for theft and fraud. The construction company settled a class action lawsuit for $15 million, with most of the money going to veterans who'd been wrongfully terminated. But the personal consequences were more complicated. Jane had taken emergency leave from her position at the Pentagon to be with me, leaving behind a critical briefing about overseas operations that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. You didn't have to come, I told her as we sat in my hospital room, watching news coverage of the story. Yes, I did. You taught me that family comes first, mission second. Sometimes the most important mission is protecting the people you love. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. Jane smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since she'd arrived. She'd also be furious that someone hurt her husband. Mom never backed down from a fight when it mattered. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Admiral Chen returned, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was a civilian in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Deputy Secretary of Defense William Hayes. Master Chief Miller, Hayes said, settling into a chair beside my bed. I've come to personally apologize for what happened to you and to discuss a matter of national importance. Sir? Your attack has drawn attention to something we've been struggling with for years. The treatment of veterans whose service records are classified. Your case has become a symbol of a larger problem. Hayes explained that hundreds of veterans from classified operations were facing similar challenges. Their service couldn't be verified through normal channels, leaving them vulnerable to accusations of stolen valor and discrimination. We want to create a special verification system, he continued. A way for veterans with classified records to prove their service without compromising national security. We'd like you to be our test case. What would that involve? Limited. Declassification of your service record. Enough details to prove your legitimacy without revealing operational specifics. It would make you one of the first veterans to have this kind of documentation. I looked at Jane, who was listening with the focused attention of someone evaluating a military briefing. What do you think, sweetheart? I think it could help a lot of veterans who are struggling with the same problems you faced, she said. But I also think the decision is yours. I spent the next week considering the offer while recovering from my injuries. The story continued to dominate news cycles, with politicians and military officials calling for reforms to protect veterans from discrimination. The construction site where I'd worked became a pilgrimage destination for veterans and supporters, with people leaving flowers and American flags at the spot where I'd been attacked. But the most meaningful response came from other veterans. Received hundreds of letters from men and women who'd faced similar challenges, veterans whose classified service made them vulnerable to accusations and discrimination. They shared stories of job losses, legal battles, and personal struggles that stemmed from their inability to prove their military service. Your courage to speak out has given us hope, wrote one former Special Operations soldier. For the first time in years, we feel like someone understands what we've been going through. Another letter came from a female veteran who'd been sexually assaulted at a job site after her supervisor accused her of lying about her military service. Seeing you fight back has inspired me to press charges, she wrote. I'm not going to let them silence me anymore. The decision became clear. This wasn't just about me. It was about every veteran who'd sacrificed their ability to discuss their service in order to protect national security. I agreed to the declassification. 2 months later, I stood in the Pentagon briefing room, where my daughter had been interrupted by my emergency call. Admiral Chen read a summary of my newly declassified service record to a room full of reporters and military officials. Master Chief Arthur Miller served with distinction in classified operations from 1978 to 2001. His missions included counter-terrorism operations in Central America, intelligence gathering in the Middle East, and special operations in locations that remain classified. He received the Navy Cross for actions during a hostage rescue operation in 1987 and multiple Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in combat. The room was silent as Admiral Chen continued. Master Chief Miller's service represents the highest traditions of the United States Navy. He risked his life repeatedly in defense of American interests, often in situations where his actions could never be publicly acknowledged. After the briefing, I was presented with a letter from the Secretary of Defense, thanking me for my service and apologizing for the treatment I'd received. But the real victory came 6 months later, when Congress passed the Classified Veterans Recognition Act, creating a verification system for veterans whose service records were classified. The law was informally known as the Miller Act, named after the case that had brought attention to the issue. Jane was promoted to Brigadier General and assigned to oversee implementation of the new verification system. Her first official act was to approve verification for over 300 veterans who'd been struggling with similar challenges. "We're not just protecting their honor," she told me during the promotion ceremony. "We're protecting the honor of everyone who's ever served." In classified operations, including you. A year after the attack, I returned to work, not as a security guard, but as a consultant helping other veterans navigate the new verification system. The construction company that had employed Torrance had hired me to develop anti-discrimination policies and veteran support programs. It was ironic in a way. The men who'd tried to destroy me because they thought I was lying about my service had actually created the mechanism that allowed me to finally tell the truth about what I'd done for my country. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a letter from Tommy Rodriguez, the crane operator who'd participated in my beating. He was writing from federal prison, where he was serving a 3-year sentence for theft and assault. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he wrote. "But I want you to know that I've learned about your real service record, and I'm ashamed of what I did. You're a real hero, and I was too stupid to see it." He went on to explain that he'd been struggling with PTSD from his own military service, a deployment to Iraq that had left him angry, bitter, and looking for someone to blame for his problems. "I took out my pain on you because you represented everything I thought I'd lost," he continued. "Honor, purpose, respect. I was wrong to hurt you, and I'm sorry," I wrote back. "Because that's what Marines do. We don't leave anyone behind, even the people who've wronged us." "Your service in Iraq matters," I told him. "What you did there was important, and your struggles with coming home are real. But taking out your pain on other veterans isn't the answer. When you get out, there are programs that can help. People who understand what you're going through." The exchange led to a correspondence that continued for months, with Rodriguez eventually becoming an advocate for veteran mental health programs within the prison system. It's funny how violence can sometimes lead to healing, how destruction can create opportunities for rebuilding. The attack behind that construction trailer in Bakersfield had been meant to humiliate and silence me. Instead, it had created a national conversation about the treatment of veterans, led to legislative reform, and helped hundreds of people who'd been suffering in silence. But the real victory wasn't the laws or the recognition or the apologies. The real victory was the moment my daughter had interrupted a Pentagon briefing and raced across the country because her father needed help. It was the proof that family bonds forged in love and strengthened by service could overcome any challenge. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at the Navy's annual Veterans Day ceremony. As I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of sailors and Marines, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. "Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform," I told them. "Sometimes the most important battles are fought long after the war is over. Sometimes you have to fight for the right to be recognized for what you've already done." In the audience, I could see Jane in her general's uniform, sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. Beside her sat Admiral Chen, Deputy Secretary Hayes, and dozens of other officials who'd responded to a simple radio call from an aging security guard who'd been beaten for telling the truth about his service. "The measure of a veteran isn't how many medals they've earned or how many operations they've completed," I continued. "It's how they respond when someone else needs help. It's whether they're willing to stand up for what's right, even when it costs them everything." After the ceremony, Jane and I walked through Arlington National Cemetery, visiting the graves of friends and colleagues who hadn't made it home from missions that officially never happened. "Dad," she said, as we stood before a headstone marked only with a name and dates, "I'm proud of what you did, not just in your military service, but afterward, standing up to those men, fighting for other veterans, refusing to stay silent." "I had good teachers," I replied, thinking of her mother and the other strong people who'd shaped my understanding of duty and sacrifice. "Do you ever regret it?" The classified missions, the years of silence, the inability to talk about what you'd done. I considered the question as I looked around at the endless rows of white headstones, each representing someone who'd given their life in service to something bigger than themselves. I regret that good people died in operations the world will never know about, I said finally. I regret that their families couldn't be told the full truth about their sacrifice. But I don't regret the work itself. Someone had to do it, and I was honored to serve, even though it meant living a lie for 40 years. It wasn't a lie, sweetheart. It was just an incomplete truth. And sometimes incomplete truths are necessary to protect complete people. As we walked back toward the cemetery entrance, I thought about the radio call that had changed everything. 4 simple words: Father under fire. A distress signal that had brought cavalry racing to my rescue and created a national conversation about honor, service, and the price of secrecy. But the real meaning of those words had nothing to do with my military service or the classified operations I'd conducted around the world. The real meaning was in the response: a daughter who dropped everything to help her father, a system that ultimately stood up for what was right, and a country that still believed veterans deserved respect for their sacrifice. I'd spent 23 years serving my country in ways that couldn't be acknowledged. But my daughter had spent her entire life serving me in ways that could never be repaid. That night, as I sat in my small apartment looking at the letter of commendation from the Secretary of Defense, I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. The most important mission of my life hadn't been the classified operations or the enemy combatants or the national security objectives. It had been raising a daughter who understood that service means protecting the people who can't protect themselves, that honor means standing up for what's right regardless of the cost, and that the highest calling of any soldier is to ensure that the next generation has something worth fighting for. The radio call that saved my life hadn't been to my old Navy unit or some classified support network. It had been to the one person in the world who would always answer when I called for help, no matter where she was or what she was doing. My daughter. My cavalry. My proof that some things are worth more than any mission, any medal, or any secret the government could ever ask me to keep. That's what Father Under Fire really meant. Not that I was in danger, but that I had someone who would move heaven and earth to make sure I survived it.